Today is October the 11th, and welcome to St. Swithin's in Sunday. Little boy Reuben went to nursery for the first time 2 weeks ago, and he went in on the first day with tears and trepidation and very fearful. At the end of the week, he said, "Mummy, can we play schools? You be the teacher and you wait at the door for me to come. And when I come, you say how excited you are to see me." Brilliant. I love that. What a lovely teacher he must have. And thank you to you all, teachers and ex-teachers, classroom assistants who influence our children. Well, what draws us to the greatest teacher of all, to Jesus? What draws you in particular to him? Why do you declare yourself to be a follower of Jesus, a follower of the way, a Christian, a little Christ? What power is there in Jesus that inspires you to sacrifice, to do good when it costs you? Jesus said, "What good is it if you only love those who love you, if you only do good to those who will pay you back? Even the pagans do these things. But I tell you, love your enemies, do good to those who despitefully use you." Why would you do that? Why would you choose to follow such a man? In this week's paper, there was a quote from a Serbian warlord: "For every Serb killed, we will kill 100 Muslims." We're not usually that extreme in our revenge and response to our neighbors, but to those who hurt us or despitefully use us, we can feel very bad. But why go to the extremes of taking Jesus' words seriously? It's not only forgiving our enemies, but also blessing them. What is it about Jesus that has captured the hearts and minds of peasants and kings for 2,000 years? Why is it that we gather together in his name in this little town of Sandy? People who between us speak more than 30 languages from all across the world. What draws us together to not only follow Jesus, but also to worship him as the image of the invisible God? Is it because, like so many, you have discovered the grace in a graceless world, kindness in a dog-eat-dog culture, in a society where the rule of law has no place for mercy? Does our heart respond to the words of St. John in chapter 1 of his gospel, where he says, "The law came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ, and in him we have received grace upon grace"? Have you fallen in love with the character of this man who mends the broken hearts of the woman who's been abandoned by 6 husbands, who restores the woman caught in adultery and shames the hypocrites who condemn her, who sees the blind beggar that no one else sees, who heals the woman that doctors can't heal, but from whom they steal? Have you discovered the joy and the freedom and security of worshiping God as Jesus reveals him to us? How come the Bible in the book of Hebrews says Jesus is the image of the invisible God? Paul, in his letter to Colossians, says he is the exact representation of his being. Jesus himself said, "If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. I and the Father are one." John, his friend, records it in chapter 15. But what about that spiritual longing and wondering that we experience, the grasping for an understanding of a spiritual side to human life? It's present in every culture, whether it's expressed in animism or polytheism, monotheism or paganism, atheism. People search for meaning and search for a spiritual side of being human. In Jesus, we discover not some vague concept of God or spiritual beings, but everyday imagery that we can relate to and understand the principles of. For Jesus says God is like a father who waits with love and longing for the return of his prodigal son. He's like a farmer who sows seed in the field and expects a harvest. He's like a gardener pruning a vine. It's like a judge to whom one day we will give account for how we have lived. He's like a helper, a comforter, a lawyer who comes alongside us to help and empower, to give us wisdom in our times of need. These are images that we can readily understand and grasp. Or maybe you follow him because you have experienced the power of his resurrection. You've seen in others and in yourself his ability to restore hopes and dreams, to bring forgiveness, to restore marriages, to bring joy where previously depression had reigned. One of the things I love about Jesus is his ability to speak words of wisdom and health into our hearts and minds, beyond just intelligence. Have you experienced men and women who sometimes are so intelligent and clever that they leave you feeling foolish and inadequate when you've left the conversation? Well, Jesus wasn't like that. He was so intellectually advanced that at the age of 12 years old, he was debating with the greatest scholars of his day, and yet he was readily understood and loved by the uneducated peasants in the fields as well. One day, after debate with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, people began to leave Jesus, and Jesus asked his disciples, "Will you also leave me?" And Peter replied with these amazing words, "To whom else shall we go? You only have the words of eternal life." I find myself taking great joy in the beauty and the simplicity of Jesus' teaching. Perhaps today, because it has so much part of our cultural heritage, we've lost the wonder of the stories that Jesus told and their power to challenge and transform. But it seems to me that Jesus' words came from the heart of God, and they go directly to the heart of the human problem. Take, for example, the article this week in the newspaper. A Lebanese billionaire turned 40 last week, but because of COVID restrictions, she could not have all her friends at one party. Instead, she held 150 parties across the world with a total cost of £20 million. While we're still reeling with the imagery of the disastrous explosion in Lebanon, and the people around the world were donating £5 and £10 to raise money for those made homeless or struggling to get by with no water or hospital, this one person could have made such a difference to her fellow countrymen, but preferred to spend her money on champagne that would eventually be poured down the sink, rather than supply water to the destitute, to buy a dress for hundreds of thousands of pounds that would be worn for one day, rather than clothe those living in rags. Jesus speaks to these things. Barry Humphries, the comedian, perhaps best known for his character Dame Edna Everage, do you know her? Entitled his autobiography, More, Please. And in it he says, "More, please," were the first intelligent words I uttered. He went on to say, "I have always wanted more. I've never had enough milk or money or socks or sex or holidays or first editions or solitude or gramophone records or free meals or real friends or guiltless pleasures or neckties or applause or unquestioning love." Of course, I've always had more than my fair share of most of these commodities, but it's always left me with a vague feeling of unfulfillment. Where's the rest? Well, seeking pleasure for ourselves will always leave us with a vague feeling of unfulfillment. 2,000 years ago, Jesus spoke so clearly and simply to this age-old problem in ways even a child can understand, gives the answer to what will satisfy our spiritual hunger and thirst, and the things that we should seek more and more of. Two things in particular: living to please God more and more, and loving each other more and more. St. Paul writes it that way in his first letter to the Thessalonians, chapter 4. And so let's finish with one little story that Jesus told, which got the crowd's attention, but as so often with Jesus, carried a challenge made all the more powerful in its simplicity. It's here in Luke chapter 12. Feel free to look it up in time after this sermon. Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 34. How did Jesus describe death and dying? Or for the arrogant and the proud and the wicked, he said, "It'll be a dreadful day of judgment for the self-righteous. But for those who find their righteousness in Jesus, who trust in the Lord, who are fearful and frightened and anxious and aware of their need of grace, for those who believe in him, they have no merit in themselves. They are welcomed," he says, "like little children, just like little Reuben, fearful of going to school. Jesus will greet us on that day with a warm welcome and say, 'I am so excited to see you here. Welcome. In my Father's house,' said Jesus, 'there are many rooms, and I'm going to prepare one for you.'" And just like the prodigal father running towards his repentant son, he welcomes us. And I pray that this week you will more and more know the deep, deep love of Jesus, vast and bounded like the sea. May you grow in your love for him and your love for those around you. God bless you. Jesus told this story to his disciples about not worrying, but trusting him. Once upon a time, there was a farmer who sowed seed in his field. It grew and grew, and he was very pleased with the harvest that he had. He was so excited that he decided that the barns that he had were not big enough, and he would build bigger barns. The next year, he grew even more crops and built bigger barns. And he was so excited because he filled those barns. And then he decided that because he had more crops than he could cope with, he would build even bigger barns. No thought of sharing what he had, no thought of giving to others, just build and build, save more and more for himself. Then one day, God said to him, "You fool, your life tonight is going to be taken from you, and who then will reap all the benefits of what I've given to you? The birds will come and they will destroy your crops, and your barns will rust." And when he awoke from his sleep, he decided that he would not just build bigger barns for himself, but share with other people. Jesus said, "Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, but store up for yourself treasure in heaven, where moth and rust cannot corrupt,